This book talks about how we have this face on the commercials and that we put out into the public for GE, that GE makes America. They make the microwaves, they make the engines, they make the light bulbs. The things that America runs on is what GE makes. But there were times where more than 50% of the revenue that came from GE was from their financial branch, which was like making loans and servicing financial products. Like, that's not a refrigerator. Hey everybody, welcome back to Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews. And today, got an actual real book about real stuff that did happen. And that book is Lights Out: Pride, Delusion, and the Fall of General Electric. Okay, so this book was written by two people who are Thomas Gryta and Ted Mann. I listened to it on audiobook, so I got it on this screen right here in very pixelated text. I don't know if you could see it, but I'll post a better picture on the thumbnail and put a link in the description. This was the best picture I could find online. But this book is about the history of General Electric, which I hope you know is a company. It's a pretty large company, or it was a pretty large company before the lights went out. But GE, as it's also been referred to for basically 100 years, it was like the 1900s major American corporation. IBM was another one of them, but GE was like heavy hitter American corporation. And they made things like light bulbs. They made things like turbine engines. They were involved very heavily in energy. But then they spread out to a bunch of other things. And this book is talking about the way the company was run on the inside over time, and how that led to a lot of problems that ultimately contributed to them having to not be a big company anymore, like file for bankruptcy or like disperse, sell off different branches of their company and stuff. And it's very interesting because I think this book takes this journey of GE and puts it through the lens of three CEOs. And they have the old school CEO who built a very strong company culture that was based on his time. Then this middle CEO that kind of tried to keep that company culture even though times were changing out in society. And then the new CEO who had to walk in on what that middle CEO did and realize that it was hugely problematic and try to save everything. But then everybody hated him because that's when all the news came out and of what had happened before his time. So an interesting take on a very large company that a lot of people allocated a majority of their stock portfolio to for retirement, that didn't end up working out because, as the title alludes to, lights went out. But I think it's good reading to give you a more accurate depiction of things like large companies. This is not the truth for every large company. I'm not saying that. But I think a lot of the times, if you were in the 60s, 70s, 80s, GE was like synonymous with stable, strong growth. It was like a symbol of America. If you worked for GE, it was a good, stable job. If you invested in GE, it was a good, stable investment. You didn't even really need to vet it because it was GE. I mean, come on, it's GE. And its reputation was so strong that it could make horrible mistakes, but everybody be like, oh, it's GE, it'll be fine. And that caught up to it, where it ended up not turning out well in the long run. And I think in terms of investment, in terms of the way that we give people reputations, give companies reputations, believe in brands and stuff like that, I think this is kind of a good reality check to say like, hey, just because they had a good commercial at the Super Bowl doesn't mean they're a good company. Hey, just because they were a good company 30 years ago doesn't mean they're a good company. Just because they make an important product does not mean that they are a good company. And by good company, you could say ethical, unethical, you could say profitable, unprofitable. There's a lot of different ways to measure a company as good, and I'll leave that up to you. But be skeptical. If you're going to invest in something, like for your retirement, or if you're going to go and get a job somewhere, which is a huge investment if you think about it, to go get a job somewhere, because if that company goes out of business or lays you off, now you don't have a job. So pick a good place that's actually stable, not that just has a reputation, but that has proof that it's doing something now, not that it did something 30 years ago. So GE, or the book Lights Out, I think is very interesting because it chronicles the history of GE, where it came from, the products it started with, the products that it grew into, and then the products that it ended with. And it's very surprising where GE is very known for household appliances. Like I'm looking around in this room I'm in right now, and there's a dishwasher, there's a microwave, there's a stove, there's a refrigerator. I see GE logos all over this room because they were really into appliances. They made turbines, like the kind of engines that make airplanes move, the kind of engines that create power for cities. They made those, and those are incredibly expensive and complicated devices. They made light bulb. That was like the main thing that they started with. Back in the day when light bulbs were like a brand new invention, they were making a bunch of light bulbs, and they were very important in like electrifying the United States and the world. But what is much less known is that GE was for a long period of their time, most of their profits were coming from finances, like loaning people stuff and doing financial work, which was very confusing for a lot of people when it came out publicly. And this book talks about how we have this face on the commercials and that we put out into the public for GE, that GE makes America. They make the microwaves, they make the engines, they make the light bulbs. The things that America runs on is what GE makes. But there were times where more than 50% of the revenue that came from GE was from their financial branch, which was like making loans and servicing financial products. Like, that's not a refrigerator. But a lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people didn't look into it because GE's reputation was so strong and their marketing was so strong. So I'd say like the page turning of this book was not the most exciting. Number one, because it actually went into a little bit of the financials and a little bit of the real history. If you're reading real history, it's not a story that's meant to make you excited. It's not science fiction. It's not a fake, fantastic thing that's meant to be like, oh, this is so exciting. It's what actually happened. And what actually happened sometimes is confusing, sometimes it's not interesting, sometimes it's boring, but it's real. And I think there are definitely parts of this book that are real, so they're a little confusing or a little boring, but it's interesting to actually get a sense of how a big company operated on the inside for long periods of time with almost no oversight because of their reputation. And so I think that's interesting. It's kind of this lesson in what can happen with reputation, which to me is like, if you know what the halo effect is, which is discussed in this book, the halo effect, it kind of happened here where GE had a couple of good qualities, so everybody was like, oh, they have strong capital performance, they're a big company, so they must be this, they must be this, they must be this, they must be financially stable, they must be doing ethical business, they must be growing, they must not have credit problems, and I think this book is a really good example of how the halo effect, or how this thinking where people get basically brainwashed by branding or by propaganda or however you want to call it, into thinking something's good even though things are not going well, and there's evidence, but people are ignoring the evidence. There's red flags, but people are so caught up in their lovey-dovey feelings that they don't look at the red flags, and things go poorly because we didn't do our due diligence. So the book is Lights Out. super interesting. Not interesting in like after you've read it, the information you think about it and you're like, wow. During the reading, wasn't that interesting. I'll be honest, but or the listening, because I listened to it on audiobook. But it was something I'm glad that I went through. It helps me. I'm trying to learn a little bit more about companies and investments and how America works. And this was a step in that direction to help me learn about how a big company worked over time, how different CEOs really have sway in how a company works. So when a company changes CEOs, maybe if it was good in the past, literally that one thing where the CEO changed may cause the company to be totally different. And this isn't something now that I'm just hearing on Instagram. It's something that I've at least read a book about. So I have more details into how that can be. So it gives you a lot of cool insight into how people act, how companies can act, how the change in culture and times and laws has something to do with the performance of a company, and how you can just blatantly hide a bunch of bad things for a long time and then it has to all come out at some point. So the book is lights out. I recommend it if you are the type of person that likes to have an accurate depiction of what's going on around you, especially if you live in America, especially if you invest. And if you have a retirement account, you are investing, period. If you have a 401k, you are investing. There's other people that actively invest, but everybody with a retirement account is investing, and you should learn about it. It doesn't matter if you're scared. You should do some things to educate yourself about how investing works, and I think this is a step in that direction. So the book is lights out. I would recommend it for people who are trying to learn about companies or investing or business practices or even just psychology between people. But it's not a storybook, even though it is history. History is a story. The word story is right in that word, his story. But it's not this exciting, gripping tale. It's a real account of what happened from a certain perspective. Obviously, there's different perspectives. You can tell the story different ways. But I think this way was pretty good. So yeah, this has been Jordan Tremaine Book Reviews with another one for you, and I will catch you guys later.